and you find it helpful, please turn in it to Luke chapter 24. This is where we'll be spending our time. Here we've got this picture of two people who were in Jerusalem for Passover, and they have seen Jesus crucified. And I think it's an important thing for us to plug ourselves into the Jewish perspective here. It's hard for us because we're Western people in a normal Western industrialized country. It's very difficult for us to think in this grid. But I think it's important to think this way because the meaning of this text, in my view, carries with it the history from which it comes. And if we ignore that and just try to find some kind of sage value in the text without looking at the Jewishness of it, I think we're going to miss the message altogether. So these two people are followers of Jesus, and they are now leaving Jerusalem after seeing all these events, and they are totally dejected because their leader is dead. That's all they know. Jesus is dead. And so they've got these reports from these crazy women who are saying that we've seen him alive. The angel told us he's alive. They've not seen him. And so they're just going to pack up and they're going to go home. Let's look at the text. I'll begin reading in verse 13 of Luke chapter 24. Now on that very day, two of them were walking on their way to a village called Emmaus, which is about 7 miles out of Jerusalem. And they were talking to each other about all the events that had happened. And while they were talking and debating these things, Jesus himself approached and began to accompany them. But their eyes were kept from recognizing who he was. Then Jesus said to them, "What are these matters you're discussing so intently as you walk along?" And they stood still, looking sad. One of them, named Cleopas, answered Jesus and said, "Are you the only visitor in Jerusalem who doesn't know the things that have happened in these days?" And Jesus said, "What things?" "The things concerning Jesus the Nazarene," he said, "a man who with his powerful deeds and words proved to be a prophet before God and all the people, and how our chief priests and the rulers handed him over to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped that he was going to be the one who delivered Israel. Not only this, but now it has the third day since these things have happened. Furthermore, some of the women of our group amazed us, and they were at the tomb early this morning. And when they didn't find his body, they came back and said that they had seen visions of angels who had said that Jesus was alive. And then some of them who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but they didn't see Jesus. So Jesus said to the two, "You foolish people, how slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Wasn't it necessary for the Christ to suffer these things and to enter into his glory?" Then beginning with Moses and all the prophets, Jesus interpreted to them the things written about himself in all of the scriptures. And so as they approached the village where they were going, Jesus acted as though he wanted to go on further, but they urged him, "Stay with us. It's getting late. The day is almost done. It's evening." And so he went in to stay with them. When they had taken their places at the table, each of them, he took the bread and blessed it and broke it and gave it to them. And at this point their eyes were opened and they recognized who he was. And then he vanished from their sight. And then they said to each other, "Didn't our hearts burn within us while he was speaking to us on the road, while he was explaining the scriptures to us?" So they got up that very hour and returned to Jerusalem. And they found the 11 and those with them gathered together and saying, "The Lord has really risen, and he's appeared to Simon." Then they told what had happened on the road and how they recognized him when he broke the bread. This couple here is very significant. These two people are not just random people. These are actually Cleopas and Mary. If you go to John chapter 19, you'll find these people listed. Mary is Mary's sister, the mother of Jesus. This is her sister, Mary. Just for your information, Mary, every fourth woman in Jerusalem, in Judea, in all of the Levant, was named Mary. It was the most common women's name given at that time in history. So this is nothing unusual to find Mary and Mary 1 and Mary 2. Just like in Dr. Seuss, thing 1 and thing 2. And so these are Jesus's aunt and uncle, Aunt Mary and Uncle Cleopas, who are traveling back to Emmaus. And think of this. This is something I want us to keep in mind as we go through this text today. The text says, they say of themselves, are not our hearts burning within us? How many times have you been in anything wherein you were in a Sunday school, you were with a friend just talking about the Lord or about your life, and you were warmed by what you were hearing or saying? We've all had that experience. If anybody in this room is a believer, at some point you've had that experience of being warmed in that way, but they were so dejected that they couldn't receive it. That's something to keep in mind here. They're trudging home, they're utterly dejected, they're utterly disappointed, there's no hope here, there's no resurrection faith here at all. These people are right where I would be if this were me. I'd say, look, I was right there in Jerusalem when they nailed him up there. I watched him die, I watched him take him down, I saw him, Joseph of Arimathea or somebody that a Sanhedrist to come and get him and carry him away. And so the whole movement, these two people have been invested in Jesus as Messiah, and now their whole investment has evaporated. Can you imagine what that feels like? To have everything you've poured your life into for, I guess if they were there from the beginning, 3 years, but if not, 6 months, 10 months, a year, whatever, that you've poured your life into it. We've invested ourselves so heavily, and it's all gone. I think about that when we were praying today. People who invest their whole life in a storefront, selling whatever they do, and it's gone. It's gone. There was an image in the news feed on my phone where there was this Korean man on the sidewalk on his knees picking up the debris of his store that had been attacked by some of the bad actors in these protests, and it was gone. His whole life, his livelihood, everything. So this whole movement is over for these two people. They're not looking at this and saying, oh, praise the Lord. Just like you said, Madeline. You know, we talk about the loss of the Thomas family, and then let's sing a praise song. There is something about that contrast that really means something. These two people don't have anything like in their minds, let's go and sing a happy praise song. They're done. No point to stick around in Jerusalem. We might as well just go home. Passover's over. The movement's over. You know, if you and I were Jewish at this time in history, and we were following Jesus, and our Messiah got himself crucified as a criminal, then either we find a new Messiah or we just go home. That's all that's left to do. This has got to be the most severe crisis of faith for these people that they've ever had. I mean, where's God? Where's God here? Right? Jesus talked about God all the time and talked about him in ways that would say to you and me, let's dig in and be followers of Jesus. Let's invest ourselves in following the Lord. What about all the awesome things Jesus said about God? Where's the abundant life? They might have been standing right there when Jesus taught in John 10 about the abundant life. Where's the abundant life for us now? I tell you, these questions aren't questions just for them. These are timeless ones. We talked about it in Sunday school this morning. Cleopas is so dejected. This is something that the text doesn't really capture, but I'm going to capture it for us this morning. You must be the only dolt that doesn't know what just happened in Jerusalem. That's what Cleopas says to Jesus. You must be the only moron that doesn't know what has happened here. Well, the funny thing is, of course, the person they're talking with is the only one who really does know. Right? Jesus is the only one who really does know. So the stranger, Jesus, asks them, what are you talking about? And they tell him what's been going on in the most depressing terms. And think of this text. We thought he was to be the deliverer of Israel. What's the context of that? What would you add to that sentence? We thought he was going to be the deliverer of Israel, but we were wrong. That's the only conclusion you could draw here. We were wrong. So their faith in all of this, and Jesus And the God that Jesus spoke of, I'm just going to say, is shattered here. And they're just going to go home. They're in the most ordinary situation they could possibly be in, right? They walked there probably to get there for Passover. Now they're just walking home. It's over. The party's over. A very mundane, ordinary situation that they all would have experienced multiple times in their life. They don't believe the women. The tomb was empty. I'm sure they're just thinking, well, somebody took the body. Maybe. This would be very commonly done at that time in history. If you were crucified in the Roman system as a criminal, which meant you were a really bad one, you would not be buried. They wouldn't allow it. It's remarkable that Joseph of Arimathea could go and get the body here. Normally, they would toss you outside Jerusalem into the valley of Hinnom to be burned with the rest of the trash. That's the way it is. If you're a criminal, you are not going to have a flowery funeral. That's just the way. We want to make sure, the Romans want to make sure that a person was as humiliated as possible, even after they're dead. Have you ever seen these images of the people in Somalia back 15, 18 years ago now, maybe even more, I guess it would have been in the 90s, wherein the Somalis captured some of the American soldiers there, killed them, and then drove through the streets, dragging their bodies through the streets. I'm thinking, why do that? They're dead. I mean, you're not hurting them any further. But there's something about that in human nature where we want to humiliate, if we can, even beyond the grave. So the empty tomb can only mean somebody made off with the body, or the Romans didn't want to give Jesus a proper burial here. So the stranger keeps probing these people and asking them questions. He is coaxing from them who they really are and how they really feel. How do you really feel about all this is the way this conversation's going. And they're telling you. They're not playing some game like we do. We come to church and we talk about, I refuse to do it, which you've probably detected over the years, but we talk about all the flowery things that God does. And we talk about them in ways that I'm just going to say are like a Facebook picture. Artificial. Facebook, everybody's smiling, everybody's happy, the picture's the best it can. I'm not going to say who this is, but I've got somebody close to me whose picture is so obviously retouched. There is no way they look like that. I mean, it's like a mannequin. It's incredible to me. I'm thinking, do you really want to do that? I mean, somebody's going to come to your house eventually and they're going to say, wait a minute, this is not you. But that's what we want. It's what we do at funerals, right? We put on the best face possible. And these people aren't having any of that. They're not going to do that. They're going to tell this stranger exactly how they feel. We thought he was going to be the deliverer of Israel. I'll tell you, I think there are some really powerful messages here in this little text. The first is, for me, most of our life we're just like this couple. If we're honest. God, where are you? God, how come you didn't solve this problem? God, I've been praying for this for 10 years. God, I've asked you repeatedly for this. God, where are you? And we've got elements of it in our lives that constantly chip away at our picture of who God is. Constantly. The picture that we see and that Jesus would give them and would give us is not the picture that we see when we look around. So we think pain makes us wonder, suffering makes us wonder, is God good? If He's good, does He care about what I'm going through? Disappointment, I will say this without any hesitation. Proverbs says this better than I. A sickened heart will stop even a strong man. Right? If we are heart sick, that will stop anybody. I mean, how many successful people do we see in this world where we're looking at them and thinking, man, you got it made, and then we read the next morning they've killed themselves? Mm-hmm. Why is that? Boris Becker, he was asked after he'd won all those Wimbledons, what's on your mind, Boris? He said, the hardest thing for me is to not commit suicide. Oh. Why? Because a sickened heart is far worse than a sickened body. These people were honest with this stranger. They were just honest with him when we thought he was going to be the deliverer, but we were disappointed. They're not trying to play some game with him. And we play games, I'm going to say, in most of our church life. I remember when I was attending a church in Virginia. Loved that church. It was a great church. I loved the pastor there. But he would do things in the pulpit that just amazed me. I would think, I wish I felt like that all the time. I wish I felt as good as he's portraying himself to feel in this moment. But when I go to work on Monday morning, my life doesn't look like that. How come I've got to look like that when I don't feel like that? That's kind of the contrast there. These people aren't going to do that. They're just going to say, look, we're disappointed, we're going home. The Messiah's not the Messiah, and it's over. Notice the stranger's reaction to them. He doesn't fold his arms and walk away, right? He doesn't condemn them. He doesn't ridicule the fact that they paid no attention for the 3 years he was teaching. He just patiently walks them back through the whole thing all over again. Takes the Tanakh, the Old Testament, and just walks them through it. Isn't it fascinating? This is so amazing to me that Jesus taught them from the Word, the Scriptures, the written Word, before he revealed himself to them. Wouldn't that have been easier? It's me! You can relax now, right? Here I am. See, it's all okay. You don't have to be depressed and everybody jumps and runs around like in a TV show. We watched this movie last night, and it was a movie about all kinds of terrible things happening, a falsely accused person, and you just thought their life is over. And then at the very end of the movie, it all got worked out. And I thought, I am so happy to finally watch a movie where everything works out. I'm so tired of these movies that leave us scratching our heads saying, did it turn good or bad? I don't know. I want to see a movie where everything worked out in this movie, even beyond what I could have imagined working out, it worked out. I was so happy. Jesus could have done that right then. He could have just showed up and said, here I am. But no, he walked them through the Scripture again. How many times had he done that in the 3 years he'd been around? I think as they considered these two people, Jewish people at this time in history, they knew their Tanakh very well. I read an article wherein a 4th century Egyptian person was applying to be a deacon in a church, in the Coptic church. You know what they had to do in order to just be a deacon? Not an elder, not a pastor, not a whatever, a deacon. They had to recite 5 Psalms and the whole book of John from memory. Or they didn't qualify. So these people knew their Tanakh. They knew their scriptures. Do you think, as Mary and Cleopas thought about this event, that they didn't think about, say, Habakkuk? Let me just read a couple of passages here for you. And this is how I think they would be thinking. They're walking home. They think it's all over, and they think this. I listened and my stomach churned. The sound made my lips quiver. My frame went limp, as if my bones were decaying. I shook as I tried to walk. I longed for the day of distress to come upon the people who attack us. Can you imagine them seeing that when they think of Rome? I think so. I think they would look at the Romans and say, I hope that comes to you, because I'm so broken now. Habakkuk has described exactly how I feel. But then in the same passage, Habakkuk goes on and says, when the fig tree doesn't bud, when there are no grapes on the vines, when the olive trees don't produce, when the fields yield no crops, when the sheep disappear from the pen and there are no cattle in the stalls. That's bad. That's bad. If you get to that spot, you're in bad shape. Kroger's gone, Waycross has been wiped off the map, and we have no food in the pantry. I'll rejoice in the Lord because of the Lord. I'll be happy because of God who delivers me. The sovereign Lord is my source of strength. He gives me the agility of a deer and enables me to negotiate the rugged terrain. You and I in this room, and I'm going to admit it for myself, I'm the same way. We all cling tenaciously to this life. We do. Tenaciously. And I'm not saying that's wrong, but I'm going to say what it does to us in this idea of clinging to the transient. We forget. It makes eternity seem so far from us. Nothing in our life looks like the joy of the Lord. And eternity's just this wispy shadow off in the distance. I'm going to say, think of it like this. I remember, and this happens to me daily. I think about my life when I was in my teens and 20s and 30s. Teens and 20s specifically, before I was a believer. And I look back on those days and the things that I did and said, and I wish with all my heart I could go back and relive those days as a believer, but I cannot. But here we are today. And we're reading these passages and seeing this dejection, and we're seeing ourselves very much in the same situation in many respects, in the way in which we feel about the world. But you and I, if you're a follower of Jesus, you and I have eternity. Eternity. So, if somebody pulls me off to the side and wants to have an hour-long conversation with me at Walmart, I can afford the time. I've got eternity. Doesn't bother me. I can be really frivolous with my time in terms of the time spent walking with God. These things may seem very distant to us. And I know they seemed distant to me when I was young. Very distant. And these texts, just like the hymn, right after we talked about Judy Thomas, we sing this hymn of triumph. Those things can seem like a taunt to us. It can seem like, have you ever been really, really hurt and had the happy, clappy Christian show up and say, praise the Lord? Let's praise the Lord. I'm thinking, I don't feel like that right now at all. But these two people were unknowingly walking with Jesus. So how do we overcome? Well, the only place we can learn what it is to do what that hymn said we sang is to have all the props kicked out. I don't know any other way. I can't whoop up that kind of trust. And what is the trust? Well, it's twofold. One, I want to live my life. I do. I don't most of the time, but I want to. Live my life as though God really will show up if I really, really need Him. That I can believe that and rest there. Just rest in it. Because I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. I may climb a ladder tomorrow, fall 8 feet to the ground, break my neck, and then I'm using a mouth stick to move a computer after that. I mean, it could happen. How do we trust? The only way we can learn it is when the props are kicked out. And then God's going to show up. But then the second part of that is, do we really, as we sit here today, believe that we're going to win? Period. Not now, not next week, not in a year. Period. As an ultimate thing, we're going to win. Cleopas and Mary could not see that they were going to win. Until what? They saw Him alive. That changes everything. He is alive. Apart from the resurrection of Jesus, I just say this as a blanket statement, as a universal negation, as we say in philosophy. Apart from His resurrection, there is no hope for any human being on this planet. Never has been. I don't know where everybody is, but if I've said anything about which you've got a question, you'll